Hi everyone, welcome to week 2 of the Career and Employment Resources course. Last week we had an introduction to the course and a review of the 3 stages of the career life planning model. This week we will revisit the 3-stage model briefly to examine the various roles of career development practitioners and how they fit into the model, and we will focus more specifically on stage 1 of the model, Who Am I?, and we'll look at some resources that fit with that step. In addition, you'll have an introduction to the ABCD model, which can be used to evaluate resources to ensure you're sharing the best information and resources with clients in the field. This is the model that you need to be familiar with to do the assignment on evaluating a resource, and I'll touch briefly in this lecture on this assignment later, which is due at the end of week 3. It's important to realize that when you're working in the field, clients can easily become overwhelmed by the steps and information involved in a job search or career decision-making process. You will need to simplify and demystify the process, and in fact, this is part of your role as a practitioner, and then you can lead clients through the process in a step-by-step manner at a pace that works for them. Some clients are able to absorb information and work things through very quickly, and others need a little bit more time and a little bit more support. Here's one example of how we can apply this to a job search process. And this image you see, I just made this up myself so that I could fit the 3 stages into it. There are plenty of other models and frameworks out there that you may have seen that outline the steps really in a lot more detail than what I've got here in the job search process. So each one of these boxes that you see contains a number of potential steps and tasks and activities that a client might need to do in each step. Now, showing this to a client at the beginning of their job search can cause them to become overwhelmed with the process, and they may even become impatient with you as a career development practitioner because they just want to get right down here to step 8 as quickly as possible. And it might be hard to help the client understand that they do need to work through this process, and you will need to decide at what pace and at what rate they can absorb information in each of these steps. You want at the same time to try and prevent them from getting too far ahead of the game while also helping them to feel they're making progress toward their goal of finding a job. So very important that when we're working with clients, we start at this first step of identifying who am I, particularly if they're wanting help with a job search or making a choice about occupation or education. So we always want to start with the who am I stage and do self-assessment and then explore occupations or employers of interest, so what's out there, and then decide on occupations and employers to target. How do I get there? Then we move on to the rest of this process, creating your marketing tools such as your resume, applying for jobs, doing interviews, following up after interviews, responding to and negotiating job offers. So every one of these steps, there are little mini steps that have to be taken within each one of these. It's important to try and find a way to work with clients through this process, again, at a pace that works for them. And as I said, to try and prevent them from jumping too far ahead, because really jumping ahead can put a client behind. In one example, many years ago, I worked with a client who had been laid off from a job some weeks before I met him. He was very successful in his field, and in fact, he knew many very high-profile, famous people in his field. He was very successful as a videographer. Written English was not a strength for him, but it was not important in the work that he did as a videographer, and he'd won many awards for his work. Unfortunately, before he met with me, he sent out his resume to everybody that he knew, including the high-profile famous people he knew. So he really jumped ahead to step 5. And it's commendable that he was so action-oriented, and I praised him for that. And, he was very motivated to move through the process. But by kind of jumping ahead to this step, he had, in fact, put himself a little bit behind and may have, it turned out okay, as I'll explain in a moment, but may have damaged some of his, contacts in sending out this resume that was not sufficiently polished. So I did work with him and help him to redo his resume, and then he resent it to everybody that he knew with an apology saying he'd meant to send the revised one, and it worked out to be okay. As I said, he had a very, very good reputation. So he did eventually get work in his field because he was so very skilled and so very well recognized. But for other people and other clients you may work with, this may not turn out as well for them. So you can see how jumping ahead to these steps can in fact put you behind because you haven't really done the foundation of work that needs to be done. A client who wants to just jump ahead and send the resumes, apply for jobs, and get out there and do interviews. Again, it's commendable that they're that motivated, but at the same time, if they are in interviews and they've skipped over, they haven't really done the work in the Who Am I section, and they start getting asked questions in interviews such as, tell me about your strengths and weaknesses. What are your personal values? How would you describe your personality style? They may have trouble answering those questions because they haven't done the work in the Who Am I stage. So the challenge is, as a career development practitioner, is that you need to find a balance between helping your clients to cover off these steps while also helping them to feel they're moving forward at a good pace. So what if you have a client that is trying to rush through too quickly and doesn't have patience for this process? Well, first, I just want to mention that you're going to, as you're leading clients through this process, you're going to need to know resources that fit with all of these aspects. And so again, that's part of what you are working with when you are learning this model and applying it in the field. And really, once we get past this third step here, once we get into step 4 and beyond, we really are completely in the how do I get there phase. So the client's got a clear target, they know what they want to go for, and then we follow through. If it's a job search process, we would follow through on these remaining steps, all as part of how do I get there. The resources that you're going to explore, and we will start on today, will all, for the most part, fit into one or more of the 3-stage model that we've been discussing. So it will be important for you to help your clients understand the model, or if you're using something like a similar kind of framework out in the field, to help them understand where they are in the model. And you could even show them the 3-stage model to help them understand where they are. You can even explain it to them and then ask them to tell you where they think they are. I'd like to show you now just a slightly different view of the model. You can see initially these are the 3 stages that we've been exploring, just kind of in a straightforward list. And again, you could show this to clients and ask them to identify where they think they are and even talk with them about what they think they need to move on to each stage in the model. But I want to show you a different way of viewing the model, and just give me a moment to get all these little bits and pieces to show on the screen. So what's been added is, first of all, you can see it's laid out more in a kind of a triangle, upside down triangle shape. And you can see that there are arrows that point between each section. And there are several reasons for these arrows to be pointing in different directions. So for example, you may work with a client on Who Am I, and you may share resources with them to help them get a clear sense of themselves and develop their knowledge of self. So it might be, might be assessment tools, it might be a narrative or storytelling approach, but you're going to do some work with them in this Who Am I section and help them when they feel they have enough information about themselves and understanding of themselves that they would then move on to the What's Out There stage. And they may start looking at occupational descriptions, for example, for fields that they're interested in, or they may look at educational pathways. But they might realize as they start examining options in this field that perhaps something they were thinking of doing based on the results may not fit with them after all. So it may be that an educational pathway is too long for them, or too expensive for them, or it's not feasible for some other reason. Or clients may think that they know what's involved in a certain type of work, or they may think, yeah, I just really want to work outdoors. But as they start to explore it and get to understand what it really involves, they may change their mind. They may decide, I'm not really sure that is what I want to explore. Or they may discover that the job opportunities within a field that they're interested in are very limited and are projected to become even less available. So they may backtrack then to the Who Am I? Okay, well, if this is not what I'm going to do, then let me go back and think about this some more. So that's where we get into the review, evaluate, adjust aspect of the model. So there may be some going back and forth between who am I and what's out there as clients get to, kind of do the exploration process. And as they start to fit that with themselves, will make decisions about what to include or what to exclude as part of their decision-making process. Similarly, when you're looking at the third stage with the client, how do I get there, where the client has gathered their information, done lots of self and world of work exploration, and they think that they're ready to make a choice or a plan. Maybe they make a choice and say, I'd like to apply for this educational program, or I'd like to pursue this occupation and need to go to school to get this education. But then they realize they missed the deadline to apply for that program, or it's already full, or the standards are so high they're not sure they can get in without academic upgrading. So here as well, there could be some going back and forth between all of these stages, even when you get to the how do I get there stage. Sometimes we get to the how do I get there stage and are right into that stage, and then the individual realizes maybe this just really isn't what I want. So they may get into an education or training program, and maybe as they get more exposure to a particular activity or work, they begin to realize they have kind of an epiphany, and this isn't really what I want, and this isn't really who I am. I saw this a bit when I was in the counseling office at George Brown with nursing students who had gone into the program thinking they really would love to do this kind of work and didn't really realize till they got into the actual clinical practice part of the program that they really didn't like it. They didn't like the idea of working with sick people, and the sight of blood makes them faint and so on. So you can have somebody in this how do I get their stage, and it's really hard if someone is already well underway. But again, they may have a moment where they realize, this really is not what I want. Now what do I do? So you might have to lead somebody back through this model again to revisit who am I and what's out there, and then come up with a new how do I get their plan. So there could be a lot of going back and forth in this model. And unlike the previous version of Parsons' model that you saw that was listed just as the 3 stages, this view of the model is dynamic, and your role is to help the client to constantly move through the model until they finally do settle on something that is a plan they can pursue. But again, down the road, you may know someone who may have thought they knew who they were. Maybe this even applies to you and what was out there, what they wanted to pursue, but maybe they get laid off from a career or a job and then realize that maybe I need to go back to the beginning now and really think about what I want to do and who do I want to be. So that may have been a process you yourself have gone through, and maybe that's what's led you to be here in our program. So clients will not always move through this model in an orderly 3-step process, and they may cycle through it a few times. It's not unusual for us to go through this model a few times in our lives. And so again, it's just important for you to identify where is the client and to help them move through this model to the point that they can make a plan and come up with an action plan that they can pursue. So I'm going to stop the video at this point, and in part 2, in the next video, I'm going to talk about the different roles that a practitioner might play in this model. So please pause here, and when you're ready, go on to the second video in this lecture series.